Welcome back. This is part 2 of 2. This is the Storypunks podcast, the show where we talk about all the punks. So steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, and all the other punks. Today is episode 32. It is the continuation of my discussion with eco-punk author Jesikah Sundin. Today we're talking about medieval, mythological, and pagan tie-ins to the punks. So cool! Now, some of you are familiar with myth punk, which gets into some slightly different territory than what we're talking about today, even though we're talking about a lot of very adjacent things. So if you're interested in myth punk, I still think there's a lot here for you. But officially, Jesikah Sundin writes in the genres we talked about in the last episode, part 1 of this discussion. So in episode 31, we talked about eco-punk, manor punk, and cyberpunk, and a few other punks that we just talked and riffed about. But today we're talking about specifically medieval, mythological, and pagan tie-ins to the punks. One of the reasons is because she has taken the Arthurian legend back to its roots, and in that she's found some really cool ways to punk the common narrative. So that's a really fascinating thing to think about. What is maybe already a derivative of something original, and then if you go back to the original, you're almost like rebelling against what the prevailing notion of that legend is. And that's what really affected me about our discussion here. So I really am looking forward to wrapping up everything we started talking about in episode 31, but also going on this pretty amazing tangent / deeper treatment of those themes. And I think you're going to be as fascinated as I was. But first, I hope you'll check out my partner for this amazing interview, and that is Opulent Mobility. This is the best thing I've seen in a long time when it comes to solutions for adaptive technology or assistive technology. You may hear it by different terms. And again, since this is a double episode, I think most of you heard my introduction. I want to tell you just a little bit about the story behind it because I thought it was really fascinating. Creator A. Lara Brody says, I got interested in assistive technology after a partner had a stroke. I was fascinated by the devices, but was shocked at their impersonal ugliness. I can totally relate. With the help of a wheelchair-using friend, I turned an old Neutron R51 chair into an Edwardian throne. Driven, and that's the name of the design is Driven, and Opulent Mobility was born. After making my next Le Flaneur, I struggled to find places to show my work. Many galleries, at least the ones open to emerging artists, are not wheelchair accessible. In spite of the good work of the ADA, a lot of places just aren't access friendly. After discovering how hard it was to make my sculptures safe and functional, I did some research about wheelchair and walker designs. There are quite a few patents online for imaginative and innovative assistive technology devices. Almost none of those designs are available for sale on the market. And I'll just remind you, I found Opulent Mobility through Etsy, so these designs are available through them. And they come with this great history of having been in an exhibit and so much artistic and community-driven design behind them. It was clear that this problem was larger than I thought. A. Lara Brody continues, I decided to curate group exhibits dealing with the subject. Maybe I could find kindred spirits, fellow artists, and people who could help me maneuver the tricky paths of medical licensing and make these fabulous devices a reality. At the very least, it would get people talking about the subject. So important. Sharing this exhibit and these ideas is the best way I know to get that conversation started. After all, we have to be able to see the possibilities before we know we want them. So if we're fortunate enough to live through injuries, diseases, both common and uncommon, and the effects of aging, we will all need the help of assistive technology at some point. And I really think that's true. So that's what this is all about. Again, last time I mentioned ways you could get involved by submitting a mobility design of your own. So all you makers out there, or just anyone, you can contribute in so many different ways. So the best way to get started is to go to opulentmobility.com. I'm going to spell it opulentmobility.com. And from there, you'll just go to Get Involved. So I hope you will. And I'm looking forward to hearing back from you about anything that you submit or that you experience as you work with Opulent Mobility. I'm so honored to be partnering with them. You can always contact me by joining the newsletter. So go to storypunks.world/newsletter. And that way you're connected to me by email. If you recall, we left the last discussion with Jesikah Sundin, where she was telling us about the Biodome Chronicles series. So let's continue. And then any other series you want to tell us about?
I'm currently working on a 500-year spin-off of that series, which is proving interesting. But I'm kind of taking instead of a more permaculture commune take on ecopunk, I'm kind of looking at a more pagan take of ecopunk. So I have this machine up in space that's been terraformed, and there are people who have been living on there. They were originally scientists, and it was for environmental warfare testing. So they had all these different biomes, and they would just splash it with chemicals, and then they would use what they think would be the antidote to heal it. And so this happened a couple of times, and the project was abandoned, and the people are left there, but now they're kind of ingesting all of those things, the chemicals and the antidotes. They are part of the land. And they used a lot of mycelium and other things to kind of heal the land. So it's kind of, how does that affect you as a person? And so I'm trying to give it a more of a Celtic Fae feel to it, where they get naturally bioengineered from the land.
Okay, I was wondering how that fit in and the names and stuff. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
That is so cool. Well, as you may know, I don't know. I never know what people know about me. So I'm writing about steampunk mixed with Norse mythology, which gets into some of that pagan stuff, you know. Mm-hmm. But it's really interesting to think about the interplay between those traditions and machines, or our perception of those things.
Yes.
So I'm with you.
Especially because a lot of them are animists. You know, they believed that living things were
alive,
and intelligent, and so incorporating that in with machine is very fascinating.
It is. It's totally fascinating. Mm-hmm. Okay, very cool. Well, thank you. Now, as you know, I have a question for you about what it's like to take one series and then write another series that is further, away in time, I guess, and in many other ways.
Yes.
And you said the challenges have popped up, so this is a perfect time to ask. What challenges or interesting things did you run into as a creator, since we have a lot of creators listening to this show?
Sure. I think for me, as being a science fiction writer, I want everything to stay within the realm of plausibility. And that's really hard to project that far into the future. And so I'm having to kind of loosen up and relax a bit and let that go and just see where the story takes me with the tech. And being okay with that, considering, the Biodome Chronicles is considered in ways hard sci-fi. There's a lot of hard sci-fi aspects to it. So I'm trying to let that go and allow the earth sciences and the biology and the chemistry and the physics to kind of make up for it once we're on that terraformed world. And hoping that people will forgive me for my idea of what the future might be. The other challenge that I've had is I'm taking a descendant of two of the main characters, and I'm trying to make this descendant feel similar to them, but at the same time, is that believable 500 years later when they've never met them? But at the right, so it's like, but I'm also, one of the things I'm bringing up in the story is ancestral memories, is the idea of that. I'm going to use that as, I think, a way to kind of explain that aspect of her personality, why she might feel familiar. But at the same time, I need to craft her to be her own person. The other thing, too, is that the Biodome Chronicles had a very lots of heavy emotional themes involved. I wanted it to be about the cycle of life, which meant I needed that to show itself in the characters. And the nature was kind of the metaphor for what was going on internally with the characters. Oh, yeah. And so the characters, they are healing from emotional abuse. They're healing from losing a loved one. They're healing from their entire world being just, ripped apart from them. What they thought they knew was truth is suddenly a lie. Just so many things. So they're healing from all of this stuff. And they continually use nature as a way to explain their emotions, or even just ceremoniously kind of release those emotions so that they can move on. And so because that encapsulates the Bidum Chronicles so strongly, I'm trying to find ways to carry out that same mood in the Last Forest Kingdoms, and I'm kind of struggling a little bit. So I'm trying to find ways where I can make that mood, thread through, so it feels like they're connected even though they're different.
Oh my goodness, that was such a cool window into your process. And I know a lot of people listening can relate, so thank you. And thanks for being vulnerable about what it takes to bring these, things that could be disparate, bringing them together and finding a way to make it match or make it satisfy both sides of you as a writer as I'm perceiving it. You're
Well, thank you.
like the hard sci-fi, but then you're going into this really exciting realm of not hard sci-fi.
Right.
Trying to make it gel. I just think that's so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. So way to be an innovator. Well, okay, so I kind of jumped ahead by going into that series as well, but for anyone who isn't familiar with the Biodome series, it converges different time periods into one story as well. So will you talk about how that worked as far as technology or how you're making that come together?
Well, I love the medieval era. I'm a fairy tale girl, and I was part of the SCA for a long time.
Okay, what's the SCA?
The Society for Creative Anachronism. It's the big medieval society, and my boys were in youth armored combat, so they would get all armored up, and then we would go to tourneys, and they would fight. Yeah, so we would have to get all into our garb, which is the term that they use for your medieval clothing. So yeah, because of that, I wanted to use the medieval era in some way, but also it was convenient because the medieval era is the age of industry, when industry started to boom. And so for that reason, it was kind of a good parallel in cyberpunk, is that, they went from having these little croft type gardens, or these little gardens per person, to having more monocrops. They started monocrops back then, and then, which is what happened in the Great Famine in the 1300s. And they had their own like little mini Dust Bowl. And so I was able to take that and parallel it with the cyberpunk stuff, but also I wanted to show how for people who are wanting to get back to their roots as a human, back into nature, back where we're living off the land, show how much work it actually takes. I think we romance the idea, and a lot of, especially where I live in Washington State, we all like to romance the idea of being ancestral, and and it's hard work. We all have our little urban homesteads, and we have our chickens and our gardens, and we knit socks for each other, and we do a lot of preserving, lots of canning, and I love that atmosphere. I absolutely love that. But it's a lot of work, and people don't realize that when they start out. And so I wanted to show, if you wanted to spin your own clothes, if your crop fails, you have no clothes. You have to use your old garments that you have and make do.
You're making trade-offs, but
if you can't roam and you're stuck, like, how would that work? So but I wanted to take that even further and go, okay, we want to colonize Mars or the moon. That's something that we're really into right now. And so I thought about that, like, why would we want to colonize another planet when we can't even care for our own? We struggle with that.
Valid
and
point.
What would happen if all technology failed? Like, how would the people know how to survive? Would they even know how to survive? Would they be able to give birth? Would they be able to treat illnesses? Would they be able to grow their food without their little agro lights and their, all of those different things? So, like, how would they make it happen? And so I wanted to explore that. So I decided that the Middle Ages was really good for that, because they did have that industry. You had your spinners and your weavers and your blacksmiths, and you had people that were your farmers and your candlestick makers and your butchers and so I thought that would be a good setup for a commune. and a way to help, if we were ever going to move to Mars, help us think about occupations in that way. Like what would happen if all technology failed, if it took 18 months to get supplies, all of that.
Oh my goodness, so cool. So it's really neat that you've linked it back to such an early period as medieval, because a lot of people, when they probably first heard you responding to this question, they're hearing industrial and the beginning of industry, and how a lot of us think that happened, around the 19th century, right?
Right.
Really, it's that transition from farming or agriculture to this
Yeah.
industry. That's so cool.
Yeah, and they started a whole economy then. People
Yeah.
were traveling and they, inns became a thing, taverns, all of it.
So mobility change. Yeah, all of this affects so much of what we talk about on the show and these anachronistic things that we love. But also, it leads me to my next question, which is, thank you. You're just making it so easy for me.
You're welcome.
Basically, I want to ask about environment and world building, because this is an environmental genre, and it's really cool to think about world building specifically for this. Do you feel like it's a stronger part than other stories, or how is it unique or distinct compared to other world building people do?
I think it's definitely unique in that you're world building in a world that isn't our own. We haven't lived there yet. Even if it is 20, 40 years into the future, we haven't lived there yet. We just don't know. And part of the things we don't know is, nature is constantly cross-pollinating itself and creating new things. It's not just humans that are engineering this in labs. Nature does it too. So we don't know what will be available. We also have the whole Darwinism effect. What will be strong, what is strong now may not be strong then, it may not be available anymore. So, there's lots of those things that we have to consider when world building. Also, like for the Bidom Chronicles specifically, I had to think about what kind of things work in an enclosed environment and what doesn't. I ended up going to Woodland Park Zoo here in Seattle, and they gave me this fantastic underground tour where I got to talk to their biologists and some of their herpetologists and botanists, and they gave me such fantastic information about what kind of plants grow enclosed in limited lighted areas, even if you're using the greenhouse type panes and whatnot. And what animals do well and what animals do not. So I had to consider that for my own story. Like if you were out in the wild, I don't know what that would look like per se. Again, it depends on your location and where you're at. But like one of the things I had to consider is like the kind of pollinators I had in the biodome, because some pollinators will eat cloth, like moths, and butterflies, and some of them will eat the crops too. So, I had to consider all of those things, and I think that that's important to put into your world building to make it more believable, especially for those people.
Research you did on that. That's so cool.
Well, and I think that's important because when we're talking about environmental change, the things we think that all nature is good, but some nature kills us.
Oh, totally. It's fierce.
Right. Not all nature is good. So you have to weigh that in what it is, the story that you're building. What is it that your characters are trying to achieve at the end of the day? If it's food production, well, you have to consider that. You have to consider the antagonists to the food production, and not just the machines or man, but nature's, all of that as well. So I think I don't know if that's true in other, eco-fiction genres, but in eco-punk, I think, like even with the Wind-Up Girl, or other stories, they've got these ideas where seeds are contraband, and so they've got these underground seed places where you can buy seeds on the black market, and that's a very eco-punk idea where I don't know if that would be true in other eco-fiction. So yeah, you have to think about those different things when world building.
So true. Okay, I have a couple of questions. Now, the first one, will you remind me what a herpetologist studies?
They study reptiles.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm excited to talk with you about your collaboration, and it's an Arthurian legend that you've developed. Now, how did you guys come to work together?
Well, let's see, a couple years ago, I read her book Moonburner, which is a Asian-inspired fantasy that has kind of like a feudal Japan or China, like that era feel to it, and it's kind of a celestial war of the genders. And so I read that and I loved it. It's also very like nature rich. Um,
Yeah.
so I loved it, and so I discovered that she lived in Seattle.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, that's awesome.
That's
And
cosmic. Yeah.
yes, and then she also was popping up in a few of the author network groups that I was in on Facebook, and so I invited her to one of my book signings because I wanted to meet her, and so we went out for breakfast first, and then she showed up at the book signing, and we just kind of hit it off. And I eventually asked her if she wanted to join me on the Comic-Con circuit because I was looking for a table mate, somebody that I could blend my stories with others, and her stories seemed to fit really well with what I was writing.
It's such a smart idea because those are steep prices to get a
They
booth at.
are
And you
very.
were at Emerald City Comic
I
Con,
wasn't
right?
at Emerald no, I wasn't there vending.
Oh,
I
okay.
was just there attending. I
Okay.
have done panels there in the past, though. This year I was just there for fun.
That's good.
No work really. Yep. But I wanted her. I just thought our books would work really well together. I think that we would serve a similar audience. Now, a lot of people consider the Bite Chronicles fantasy because of the medieval aspect, and it's very strong. So I just let people have that.
Yeah, and there's so many things going on in your story that
Yes,
whatever,
it has this, and it's written in a fantasy tongue, so I get it. But so I thought, well, we both will appeal to fantasy readers who enjoy this good world building, strong world building, and it worked. And so we did cons with each other, and we did, like, the people were so happy because we had like this giant display of books versus me and just my couple. And
yeah, that's
and
cool.
and so then we decided on the ride home from one of the cons, I was telling her how I've always wanted to write an Arthurian legend book, that I took a class in college on the Arthurian legend. It's always been one of my faves, but I want to do it from the perspective of Guinevere, the Guinevere character. And I want to put it back in its Celtic roots. I want to put it back to the Ulster cycle. I want to take the medieval French translations away and just focus on the Celtic pagan parts. And so then we decided for some reason that it should be reverse harem. Kind of like took that leap, and partly it's because Celtic women, they practice polyandry, which is multiple husbands. So
Yeah, I was going to say I laughed, but it's actually a really good fit, and I can see totally where you came up with that.
Yep, so it fit totally within the research and everything I was trying to do, and we had a lot of fun writing it together. So
yep. So cool. Well, thank you for talking a little bit about that. And would you consider this one eco-punk? I know it's probably like adjacent, but
I think maybe because the pagan feel of it, perhaps, because I think eco-punk kind of fosters like a pagan feel to the world, and so I think that this definitely does, but it's not based on nature, other than it is nature because the Celts believed that everything, all of the land and the water and the sky and the earth, all of that is living and breathing, and that we're a part of it, and the gods kind of interact with it, and then they interact with you. So in that case, yes, I suppose.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, because as we look at all these myth traditions, they were old, and so they are old, and so they were closer to the earth. They just lived a different life.
Yes.
So across the board, you can see the relevance to something like eco-punk, which I love. That's so cool.
Yep. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep, and I enjoyed having that. We don't get to hear from Guinevere's point of view very often, and so she needed to tell her story. It was time.
I was going to say, it was like way past time.
Way past time. Yep. And she's Celtic, so she's equal to the men. There is none of this like simpering, must be obedient to my king sort of a thing. It's like my way or the highway.
And you can totally see this on your book cover, because it's this warrior woman. And sometimes we don't think of, well, sometimes hardly anyone thinks of Guinevere that way. So
And she started out that way. She started out as a Celtic warrior. So yeah, in Ireland.
I'm so nerding out over you right now. This is so cool. Okay, well, let's talk about this other thing you've got going on. So if you go to the website and you scroll through some, actually, I think it was one of your main headings. I can't remember. But basically, you have these things called story candles, and you've
Yes.
developed them like a scent for each person. In maybe not each person, but your characters in your story. Will you tell us more about that?
Yes, I can. And in fact, I made sure I had a couple here to
Awesome.
show. Yes, so I have these candles that are made for me by A Court of Candles, and they are an amazing company that is dedicated to taking people's characters and worlds and literary experiences and turning them into scents and colors and this whole wonderful candle experience.
Cool.
I know. So I have them for my characters. This one is Son of Earth, which is one of the young men in the biodome. And then, I have Rainbow, that's a character in the outside world. And then, I have, one for Filion, which is the bad boy, the cyberpunk bad boy character in my series.
So
and lots of them, and Dragon. And I have them for the Knights of Caerleon series, too. The King Arthur one. Here's Dragon. But yeah, she wanted description, so I gave her a Willow Oak. I gotta show this one. This is the character on my cover. So Filion and Willow Oak are the two main characters of my series, and yep, so they each have their own candles. But yeah, so the Knights of Caerleon also have candles. So we've got one for King Arthur, and we've got one for Guinevere and Morgana and Lancelot and Galahad, and yeah, it's super fun. Great way to light a book boyfriend up and start reading.
Nice. Very, very cool. Will you give us a description of just one of the candles, like scent?
Yeah. So the three most popular are definitely these three right here. They're the Filion, Son of Earth, and Willow Oak. And Filion is tobacco, cedar, and rain. So I wanted him to have a cyberpunk.
That's the one I want.
That's the Seattle cyberpunk smell right there.
Totally.
Yep.
Oh
and then gosh. Son of Earth is sage, earth, and oak.
See, that's a good runner-up. That's awesome. For me personally. Yeah.
And then Willow Oak is willow, oak, and lavender. And there's some sage thrown in there as well. So this one is a very popular one. Now the rainbow one, this one is supposed to smell like linden trees.
I don't know what those are.
and Japanese cherry blossom. So cool. Linden trees they are known as in the North America, we call it basswood. But in Europe, so in Europe, linden trees were kind of a town center tree.
Okay.
And very, very popular in the Middle Ages. They were known as the tree of love and truth. And so they would hold a lot of proceedings underneath there, because if you were underneath the tree, you couldn't lie. And so they would know whether you were lying or telling the truth, and then they would judge you.
And just trees are so important in paganism.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And this is definitely more of like an Anglo-Saxon thing.
Oh, okay. That's what that was. Okay.
Yeah. So more of the Germanic, Norse, and then the English areas had this. You can go through parts of Europe still, especially more of the Germanic and Northern Europe areas, and most of the town villages there still have linden trees in the center. And
I had no idea. This is so cool.
The linden tree is a central tree in my story. So in the Biodome Chronicles, and the character is named after it. So Linden, but her nickname is Rainbow because she has rainbow hair. So
I love all the thought that goes behind the characters, of course, but also into the scent choices and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having the candles was, I know most authors think having a TV show or a movie is like a dream come true, but for me, like having candles was like, oh my God, I can smell my characters.
It's now 3D in this like really visceral way.
Yeah.
I love that. Maybe it'd be 4D. I don't know what scent.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know
but
either.
Very, very cool, undeniably. So let me ask you, for people who are creating,
Hmm.
What do you see as the major pitfalls? Do you have any pet peeves that you've seen as people try to create stories in ecopunk or create works of any kind of art in ecopunk?
Yeah, I think my biggest pet peeve is people who are being on the nose preachy about things. Um,
That's a
I,
good one.
I think that kind of takes away from the punk aspect, where the idea of a punk is that you're kind of going against mainstream, and you are supposed to create that agitation. You are supposed to create that disturbance, but it's not supposed to be this Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. It's supposed to be, I'm struggling to make this happen. I am very flawed. My system might even be flawed, but this is the truth as I see it right now. And and I think that's more of like a punk manifesto approach to things. Um, and so there's a lot of times people that I have read some things where people are trying to get across an agenda, and instead of allowing the reader to come to conclusions on that agenda, they're basically telling them, this is what you need to think. This is how you need to feel. And I feel like that's very anti-punk, because punk is very individual. So you got to let that person come to their own conclusion of how they feel about it. All you can do is present it.
Totally. And if you are falling into that preaching rut that a lot of us frankly can fall into, it's
Yes.
kind of in the territory if you're writing or creating
Mhm.
art. It happens. But if that starts to happen, then you're kind of missing the cool factor by
Mhm.
a long way. So
Yeah, I think that's the biggest pitfall. Otherwise, I think that people misunderstand cyberpunk sometimes. They forget that the origins were very poetic. I mean, it's postmodern writing. And so it has this very artistic feel to it. And I think people sometimes are afraid to be artsy with their story and to take chances. And that was kind of the point of postmodern writing, excuse me, postmodern writing, and why cyberpunk fits so well into that is that you can have these like paradoxical stories. You can have these fragmented stories. You can have a story that's all about machines and have it be incredibly poetic. It's just like this constant conflict of ideas and thoughts that make you think differently about a subject that maybe you've read a million times before. Um, so I think for me, like when I start to read cyberpunk or I start to read ecopunk or other things, that's something I'm looking for. So when I see it not kind of being as this artistic expression, an individual artistic expression, that I guess I feel a little sad for myself because that's what I'm going in for. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because that's not everybody else's. Everybody else may not be looking for that as well, unlike me. I'm just
I
weird.
agree with you.
Yeah, and I don't want it to come across as this judgmental thing.
Yeah, it's just taste.
That's not my intent whatsoever.
Right.
It's just more or less, if you're going to call it punk, be punk.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Okay, well, this really hooks on to what you just talked about. But as we head into 2019 further, what
Hmm.
do you feel ecopunk can be? What would you like it to be? Or what do you hope that it does for the world?
I hope it helps us to kind of amalgamate this this present culture that we live in, where we go to the farmers market and we buy our organic food, we drive it home in a machine, we store it in a machine.
Totally.
It's just
Yeah, totally.
weird. It's just, and I think as humans, in a way, we know that it's wrong, but we can't change. We're kind of already stuck in this postmodern lifestyle. We live in this, and we live in these homes that are fast built. We live, they're not made necessarily from earth anymore, or meant to blend in with our environment. We have these asphalt roads. We drive these cars. We're on computers talking to each other.
I was going to say,
Like, what are we willing to give up? And I don't think a whole lot. So I think the point of ecopunk then is, then how can we find ways to bring balance to that duality of, we are animal, we are meant to be part of nature, yet we have separated ourselves. And how do we make those two blend in a way that doesn't create discord inside of us? And so that's why I'm kind of hoping that ecopunk continues to explore and expand on.
Yeah, when you were first talking about that, I thought when you said, we know that's wrong, I think there is this dissonance inside of us. And
Mhm.
maybe we wouldn't say it's wrong or, maybe we don't have the language for it yet.
No, we don't.
But I think that reading solar punk and eco punk and all these things, they help us examine that. They help us find language for it. And then I loved how you brought it around to balance and how sometimes it's off and you need to find which categories need to change a little or adjust. And that's nuance. That's really hard to get at. So
Yes, it is. Because again, you don't want to be preachy.
yeah.
And you don't want to be judgmental.
Right.
It's the idea that we kind of destigmatize or we remove shame so that people can find that balance.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Well, I want to be conscious of your time because I know we could just keep talking forever. I'm a big fan of what you're doing and
Thank you.
You for being so articulate about it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Now, where would you like people to go to check out more of your stuff or anything else you're doing?
Sure. Well, I know that pretty much everybody's connected to Amazon, so I'm always on there. You can look me up there, but the Bite Chronicles is on every platform. So they could, if you're an iBook reader, I'm there. If you're on Nook, I'm there too. Or you can go to my website. I've got links to all the places. So
beautiful. Well, fellow authors, do you see how easy she made that? I'm just everywhere. Wouldn't we all love to say that? So it gives us something to work towards. You've been very productive, very creative.
Thank you.
And it's just been a delight speaking with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I appreciate that.
As a reminder, please go to opulentmobility.com, OPULENTMOBILITY, and click the Get Involved tab to submit your assistive technology designs. And you definitely want to go, even if you don't think that you're a maker of that kind. These designs are so inspiring. Some favorites of mine are Le Flaneur. It's a steam walker. It's so cool. And it has this amazing horn on it and also a wonderful umbrella that comes out of it. It's so whimsical and awesome. It's functional, whimsical and functional. And as mentioned, I also love the jazzy motorized scooter design that is the Jazzy Peacock. So from the back, it looks like a peacock with all their feathers, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And these are just a few of the designs, so make sure you go check this out. And even just the names are so fantastic. Nebula Enthroned, Driven, the Edwardian Cyborg Steam Electric Wheelchair, and so on. So check them out on Etsy and check them out on their website, opulentmobility.com. And also check out the Storypunk Salon and Reading Room Book Club discussion. Our first one meets on Earth Day, April 22nd. At 8 p.m. Central. So that is 9 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Mountain, and 6 p.m. Pacific. We're beginning with Paolo Bacigalupi's The Wind-Up Girl. We're starting with Eco Punk. So I will see you there in the Facebook Live session.